We are excited that you're here. Take your teaching notes out. I do want to pay kind of a special attention to the guys in the luxury boxes. Please do not use those remotes. Again, those are kind of special purpose tools, and we'd prefer you only use them at home. You know how men are with remotes, so don't use those. Okay, now take your teaching notes out. We are continuing in a series called Follow Jesus Like a Man. And for those of you who weren't able to be here last week, here's my main premise of this whole series. Our picture of Jesus determines how we follow him. For instance, last week I was really focused on the fact that I think many of us, particularly men, often see Jesus in sort of a weak way. In fact, at the risk of offending a bunch of people, I did this last week as well, I think many of us see Jesus as a sissified metrosexual who never would have been strong. And I just want you to know this, the Jesus of the Bible was a heavy hammer-carrying carpenter whose toughness was never questioned, nor was his tenderness. And I want us to have what I think is a biblical picture of Jesus, where we see his strength and we see his tenderness equally. And for us as men and for women here, that's the picture of manhood that we'd love to have, is never questioning strength and never questioning tenderhood. A couple months ago, Pastor Craig did us a great service by sharing with us a passage from Revelation chapter 1. Let me read it to you. Revelation 1, this is a picture of Jesus. I turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me. And when I turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. And among the lampstands was someone like a son of man. That's a biblical term for Jesus. Dressed in a robe reaching down to his feet and with a golden sash around his chest. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze, glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and out of his mouth came a sharp, double-edged sword. His face was like the sun shining in all its brilliance. The picture of Jesus that you have determines how you follow him. And I'm convinced that many of us see Jesus as weak. Many of us see Jesus as somebody who's wimpy, and because of that, particularly for men, we often say, wait a minute, religion's for women and children. I don't want to follow Jesus. But I'm convinced that Jesus is not weak, that he's strong. His strength and tenderness are never called into question. But second of all, I'm also convinced that many of us have a Jesus that's far too small. Our picture of Jesus is small and insignificant. That is not the Jesus of the Bible. It's not the Jesus of Revelation 1. It's not the Jesus of the New Testament Gospels. The Jesus of the Bible is a man who would look somebody in the eye, stick his finger out and say, "You come follow me." In fact, I want you to write this down in your teaching notes. Jesus will challenge you to get out of your comfort zone. He'll challenge you to get out of your comfort zone.
Do you enjoy receiving
wait, guys, I said not to use the remote.
Well, then think how much you'll enjoy giving them to that certain man in your life. Mandel's has candles for all types of manly men. Are you looking for that ultimate gift? Something that just says Dad? Try grilling out, campfire, and steak sauce. Is he having the guys over for the big game, but the home smells too much like a woman? Don't worry. Light up one of our sport-themed Mandels. Pigskin, new baseball glove, bowling alley, musty locker room. Don't know what to get the man who is admired for his manliness by other manly men? Never fear. Sweat Mandel is here. Men, it's time to say goodbye to the likes of Golden Spice Pear and Seaside Holiday. And say hello to Bait Shop, Red Meat, Wet Dog, Bacon Jalapeno Cheeseburger, Fear, Hardware Store, Charcoal, Peel Out, Mud, Fried Chicken, Leather. Mandels are scientifically engineered in our German laboratories by our professors of manology. Mandels are certified all natural, 1% wax, and 99% testosterone. This offer is not valid in stores, so call now. Mandels, makers of manly man candles since 1907. Don't delay. Call now.
Selling those in the lobby right afterwards. That'd be all right? A lot of guys buy that. Okay, guys, no more use of the remote control just because you're in the luxury box. No more of that, okay? Hey, the reality is this, is that I think that Jesus challenges us to get out of our comfort zone. And as I was thinking about that, I thought, you know what? What is the comfort zone for me? I want you to write down 3 things. First of all, the comfort zone is the no zone. When I'm in my comfort zone, I say no to anything that makes me uncomfortable. I say no to anything that stretches me. I say no to anything that causes me in the least little bit to risk or to fear. The comfort zone is the no zone. Second of all, the comfort zone is the me zone. It's the me zone, where I say yes to everything that pleases me. I say yes to what I think will make me more comfortable, more happy, more satiated. The reality is that the comfort zone is the no zone. I say no to anything that makes me uncomfortable or risky, but I say yes to everything that makes me happy. It's also the O zone, O-H. It's the O zone, where I say, I want my life to be all about the things that will make me happy, and I think my life will be all about a trajectory that will ultimately bring satisfaction and pleasure to me. Jesus will challenge you to get out of the comfort zone, and he'll challenge you to get into his zone. Now, I want you to think about that for just a moment. The truth is if you have a small picture of Jesus, if your Jesus is weak, if he's sissified, if he's somebody who's insignificant and incapable, if that's the picture of Jesus you have, he'll never challenge you to do something great for him. But I've become convinced that the Jesus of the Bible is not weak, insignificant, sissified. He's strong. And he's going to challenge you to move out of your comfort zones. So if you have a Bible, turn with me to Matthew chapter 15. I'm going to tell you a story. Many of you know it. Let me set up the context of the story. Jesus has spent all day with his disciples. They've taught, that miracles have happened, amazing stuff. You can read about the story in the early part of the chapter. But they get towards the end of the day, and he tells the disciples to get in a boat and cross the lake. And as he tells them to do that, you have to recognize this about the disciples. They were all expert fishermen. They knew what it was like to be on this particular lake. Now, maybe you've been at Lake Tahoe when the waves have started to swell and you've been out in the middle of the lake. Maybe you've been on Lake Michigan where the whitecaps begin to blow. And you know that when you get in the middle of a situation like that and the wind begins to whip up, that you can face some rather treacherous circumstances. But these were expert navigators, expert boatsmen. They knew how to handle themselves in the middle of rough weather. So he says to them, get in the boat, go across, I'll meet you on the other side. You can imagine the disciples asking Jesus, oh, what do you mean? How are you going to meet us on the other side? We're taking the boat. But he says to them, go, just get in the. So they get in the middle of the lake. And when they get in the middle of the lake, a storm comes up. And this is a huge, intense storm. The swells are going like this and coming down. The boat is like crazy. They're all trying to row their oars. They're doing the best they can, but the wind's coming against them. It's contrary to their progress. Many of them, I'm sure, were concerned or afraid. They'd been in these kind of situations before, but this was a particularly intense storm. In the middle of that intense storm, with the wind coming at them, with the waves going up and down, with them holding on, just praying and believing that maybe they could get through this, they begin to see a ghost-like apparition coming across the water towards them. Now, if you're holding on to an oar, and by the way, I don't want you to experience this story in a one-dimensional way. It's not words on a page. I want you to be there. I want you to imagine the wind coming at you. I want you to imagine the waves going up and down. Now, I don't want you getting seasick, okay? But I want you to get into the story. I want you to imagine yourself holding on to one of those oars and rowing. Put yourself in that situation. You're one of the disciples, and a ghost-like apparition begins coming across the water. And as the shadow begins to come closer, you begin to see more clearly, it's Jesus. How are you feeling? Matthew chapter 15, this is what happened to the disciples. Matthew 14. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. Don't make any mistake about it. This is a freak-out experience. They are freaked out at the storm, and they are also freaked out at the ghost-like apparition that appears to be Jesus. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, do not be afraid. I'm going to stop several times in the reading of this, because I think we read too quickly over the Bible. Take courage. It is I, don't be afraid. When I read that, I thought to myself, well, how do you do that? How do you take courage? Is it something you get in pill form? Is it something that you get because of your family background? Is that something I can go on the internet and click buy now and get it one click delivered to me? How is it that you take courage? Is that something I can shop for and find at a store? Is it something that's just built innate in you? What does that mean to take courage? I want to buy me some of that. Have you ever had a situation in your life where you said, I wish I had courage. I'd like to take me some courage right now. The more I read it though, Jesus said, take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid. Jesus commands his disciples to take courage because when Jesus is present there, fear is banished. When Jesus is present, fear literally flees. When we recognize his presence, basically if you're with Jesus, you're going to be all right. It's going to be all right. That's why we sing that song. Take courage. The story goes on to say this. Lord, if it's you, Peter, big mouth, Lord, if it's you, big mouth Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Now, I want to spend some moments thinking about that. You know, we do think of Peter a lot as a guy with a big mouth who's constantly opening his mouth and challenging the circumstance. And I want you to imagine you're one of those disciples and you're rowing the oars and you're doing your best to keep going against the wind, and the wind is coming at you and the waves are coming and you're getting that water in your face, and all of a sudden you see this ghost-like apparition and you're panicking. And by the way, the boat's not still while this is happening. The boat's going up and down in the water and you're seeing this ghost-like apparition. And when you know that it's Jesus, it's Peter the loudmouth who says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you. Now, what's your reaction to Peter? I'll bet your reaction is something like mine would have been. Idiot. Jerk. Why is he always opening his mouth and saying stuff like that? We got to row. We've seen Jesus do other miracles. We got to get going. Why does Peter have to say, Lord, if it's you, tell me to get out of the boat? You're ridiculous, Peter. You're always out on the edge somewhere in some crazy land. Why are you doing that? And if you're Peter, what are you thinking? What are you thinking to have the words come out of your mouth? Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you. Boat's going like this, folks. Ghost-like figure walking across the water. I always thought about Jesus walking on the water like he was walking on glass. Like maybe he knew where the sandbar was, and he's just walking on the sandbar. It's an old bad joke. But anyway, but he's not walking on the glass-like water. He's walking in treacherous seas. What is Peter thinking? You know what? I like Peter. I like Peter a lot. I know he messed up. He messes up all the time. I like him a lot. Peter has the kind of faith that I wish I had. Because, to be honest with you, just to be very frank, if I'm in the boat, I'm one of the disciples rowing on the oar, looking at Peter going, idiot. That's why I knew what they would be thinking. Because I'd be thinking the same thing. So then I love this. Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. Then Jesus, in a relatively short dissertation, shorter than the Gettysburg Address, shorter than the preamble to the Constitution, with no scientific proof, with no evidentiary support to allow Peter to believe in a rational way that what he was about to do was scientifically, logically, rationally justifiable. When Peter says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you, Jesus says, come. What is Jesus thinking? I don't understand why Peter talks up, but I really don't understand Jesus. Why doesn't he at least say, okay, Peter, here's the deal. I'm of a different form and substance than you are. I have supernatural power. I'm in communion with the Father, and I can do all these things. You are clay and mud and messed up stuff, and this is not going to be good for you. He says, come. The next part really freaks me out. Peter got down out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. I love Peter, but I keep thinking about the other disciples because I would have been one of them. I keep thinking, if you're one of the disciples, and even though you think Peter's got a big mouth, you like him. What do you do when Peter says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to get out of the boat? And Jesus says, come. I mean, you hear these words in the middle of the wind, and apparently they had like some sort of amplification, come. And then Peter, he starts to get out of the boat. If you like Peter, if you're his friend, what do? You stop him from being an idiot. You tell him, stupid, if you get out of the boat, the wave's going like that, you're going to die. Isn't that what good friends do? They keep people from doing stupid things. But I love that Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water. And this next part is the part of the story that most of us remember. When he saw the wind, he was afraid, and he began to sink, and he cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why do you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down, and those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. I don't know why my mind works this way, but it's just always helped me. As I read that passage, I think, gosh, man, I wish there was like an alternate ending. Do you ever watch those videos where they have alternate endings? I wish this was the alternate ending. This is the one I imagine in my mind. I wish Peter had gotten on the water, walked with Jesus, and then they walked by the boat and got to the shore, and the rest of the cowards in the boat sunk. That would be to me like a amazing story. I would get totally rebuked because I'm one of the disciples that would have stayed in the boat and would have gone, that was amazing. But that's not what happened, folks. So I got to go with the story that's there, what really happened. And what happened was Peter saw the winds and the waves, and he started to sink. I don't like that. I'm sad for Peter. I'm sad that's what he experienced. I'm sad that the fear of the surrounding elements just really kind of threw him and took his eyes off Jesus and saw all the stuff around him and he began to sink. I'm sad about that. I relate to it. I relate to being so afraid of natural circumstances around you that you take your eyes off of Jesus. But I also love that when Peter began to sink, immediately he said, Lord, save me. And I loved that Jesus reached out and saved him. There's another scene that I've thought about. Jesus picks Peter up and puts him in the boat. Now, I've been wet and cold and shivering and storm-like conditions before. And I imagine Peter just hunched over with a blanket, shivering involuntarily, a mild form of shock. And I imagine him just hunched over, and while he's doing that, all the rest of the disciples are kneeling down and worshiping Jesus and saying, we recognize who you are. And Peter's the only one other than Jesus who got to walk on the water. But he also doubted, and he began to sink, and he's wet and cold in the hull of the boat. And I'm wondering what Peter's thinking. And I'm wondering what the disciples are thinking about Peter. I believe Jesus will challenge you to get out of your boat. Get out of your comfort zone. I don't know what your comfort zone is, and you don't know what mine is, and they're probably a little bit different. But he's going to challenge you to get out of your comfort zone. So would you take a look at a couple of these things in your teaching notes? Number one, Jesus wants us to take courage. Jesus wants us to take courage. I want this teaching to apply to men and women equally. I want us all to learn from it. Ladies, I'm going to say a few things to you specifically in a moment. But men, can I just say a word to you? I believe that God planted in the heart of men a desire for us to be courageous, a desire for us to be adventurous, a desire for us to conquer obstacles. God placed that in our hearts. He intends for us to be brave. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. He wants us to take courage, but He doesn't want us to take courage just in our masculinity. He doesn't want us to take courage just in our strength. He wants us to take courage, not something you buy off the internet or have because of your ancestry or something you take in pill form, to take courage because we realize no matter what we go through, Jesus is there if we are following Him. How big is your Jesus? A small, insignificant Jesus will never challenge you to get out of your boat. He'll never challenge you to get out of your comfort zone. But the biblical Jesus, the strong Jesus, the Jesus of God's Word, the Son of the Father, will always challenge you to take courage. Here's the second thing. Jesus wants us to get out of the boat. I don't know what that boat is for you. I don't know what that comfort zone, but He wants us to get out of the boat. And men and women equally, God wants us to get out of that place, that little nest of safety. I don't know what it was that possessed Peter to say, Lord, if it's you, tell me to get out of the boat. And I'm not telling you to go crazy and half-cocked and do weird stuff, but I am saying this to you. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, if you're pressing in close to Him, if you love Him, if you're in His Word, if you're praying, if you have people around you who love you, there may be a season in your life, and I'm most assured that there will be a season, where God begins to speak to you and call you to do something that just on the face of it seems crazy. It seems risky. It seems like, oh man, He wouldn't really have me do that, would He? Maybe for you, that's talking to somebody that you don't want to talk to. Maybe for you, that's taking a step in your business or vocational future that you think, oh man, I can't do that. But if you press into Jesus, there will be moments in your life where He tells you, get out of the boat. Trust me. You can walk on water. And everybody around you will look and go, oh, and think you're crazy. But men, let me say this to you. Men, God wants us to be courageous, to be bold, to be strong men. God calls us to courage. I was looking for a courage story, and I came across one. 3 men were backpacking through the wilderness, and they came upon a roaring river they needed to cross. After much thought about how they might ford the waters, they decided to pray. So 3 guys kneeled down and got to cross this water. How do we do this? The first man prayed to the Lord for a muscular body so he could swim across. The heavens opened and poof, He was endowed with enormously muscular arms, legs, and chest. He stepped into the raging waters and began to swim. After an arduous few minutes and nearly drowning, he reached the other side. Second guy saw this, began to pray and ask God to give him wisdom. And he asked for God not only for muscles, but for tools to get across this roaring river. And once again, heavens open and poof, the tools appeared, a canoe and a paddle. So he got in the canoe and paddle. He began to make his way across the roaring river, almost capsized twice, but finally he made it to the other side. Third guy has watched these two almost disastrous results. He gets down on his knees and he prays to God. Now what he prays to God specifically for was brains to get across the river. And poof, the heavens opened and he was made into a woman. I'm not done yet. After surveying the situation, she walked 150 feet upstream and crossed the river over the bridge. Okay, now dudes, I needed to give the women just a little tiny thing. It's like a bone, okay? I had to give it to them. We're back to the guy stuff now, all right? Jesus wants us to take courage and get out of the boat. Here's another couple things. Jesus wants us to trust Him in the middle of the storm. Jesus wants us to trust Him in the middle of the storm. I don't know what storm you're going through now or what storms you've been through in the past or what storms you're going to go through in the future, but you will be in storms. And Jesus wants to trust Him in the middle of the storm. And here's why I love Peter. I have this kind of love frustration thing with Peter. I love that Jesus was not too small in the midst of this storm. Jesus was so big to Peter. His faith was so large and his belief in Jesus was so big that he was willing on the basis of a one-word answer, come, to get out of the boat, and he got to walk on water. I love that about Peter. I love that about Peter. He wants us to trust Him in the middle of the storm. Secondly, Jesus wants us to reach out to Him when we start to sink. I love that Peter's Jesus was not too small in the midst of the storm. And I don't know what storm you're experiencing, but I so long for you to have a relationship with Jesus Christ, the Jesus of the Word that is so strong and so big that no matter what you're facing, you'll never be gripped by fear. But I want you to hear this. Peter was big enough during the storm, but I know another event in Peter's life where his Jesus was too small. They were in the garden. They'd been praying. Jesus told the disciples they would all betray Him. Peter said, no, I'll never do it. Grabbed his sword, said, we'll fight to the death. Did the guy thing. And Jesus said to Peter, before the rooster crows 3 times in the morning, you'll deny me. A few short hours later, Peter's in a courtyard. They've arrested Jesus. He's being tried on a mocked-up, trumped-up charges. Peter's warming his hands by the fire, and a young lady comes to him. We don't know the age, but I imagine her being a late teenage girl comes to him and says to him, Peter's a big, burly fisherman. Think about Deadliest Catch, one of those big dudes, used to navigating storms and all that. And he's warming his hands by the fire, and the young lady comes to him and says, you were with Jesus, right? And Peter says, no, I don't even know the guy. A little bit goes by, and a man comes up. Says, hey, you're one of his followers, aren't you? I saw you with him. And Peter says, no, man, I don't even know him. What are you talking about? Turns his back to him and starts warming his hands by the fire again. A little bit later, we don't know how long, the young lady comes up again, this servant girl. She kind of this time reaches out and says, I know that I saw you with him. You're one of his followers. You're with the man that they're trying up there. You are one of his. Peter turns to this little girl, this young lady, and he swears at her. He says, I don't even know the guy, and curses some more. And at that moment, the rooster crows, and Peter weeps bitterly. Now, thankfully, we know that later on in Peter's life, Jesus comes to him after his resurrection. Says, Peter, do you love me? He asks him that question 3 times. Each time Peter responds in the affirmative, Jesus said, then take care of my sheep, tend my lambs. I want to ask you, I said alternate ending. I want you to imagine for just a moment that you're in the middle of the storm. You're one of the other disciples. Peter gets out of the boat. He walks on the water. It's craziness, but he's walking on the water. And he begins to sink. I want you to imagine for just a moment an alternate ending. Can you imagine for just a moment? Peter begins to sink. He calls out, Lord, save me. I want you to imagine for just a moment that Jesus doesn't. Peter was a doubter. He was disobedient, cocky. I want you to imagine for just a moment, close your eyes and just imagine. Peter's sinking in the water. He reaches out and says, Jesus, save me. I want you to imagine for just a moment that Jesus doesn't. Can you imagine that? Okay, open your eyes. Can I tell you that I can't imagine that? I cannot imagine that. Because for Jesus not to respond to the cries of a drowning man who reaches up his hand and says, Lord, save me, would break every aspect of the character of Jesus that we know from his word. Jesus is not one who waits for people to sink and then says, hey, serves you right. Our Jesus is the one who, when he hears the cries, Lord, save me, reaches out his hand immediately and brings Peter to safety. Yep, he rebuked Peter for his lack of faith, and I'm sad for Peter's sake that he saw the winds and the waves and he turned away from Jesus. And I'm sad that he got rebuked by Jesus for his lack of faith. But I take great joy that Peter was willing to get out of the boat. He was willing to immediately, when he started to sink, reach out and say, Lord, save me. And I'm convinced of this. Whatever storm you are in, that is what he longs to hear from you. Whatever is enveloping you, that is what he longs to hear from you. Lord, save me. The Bible records that immediately Jesus reached out and took Peter into the boat. Friends, Jesus wants to reach out to us when we begin to sink in the storm. So if you're a dad or mom or anybody, but particularly if you're a dad, you ever gone through storms in your job? You ever gone through storms in your marriage? It's all been smooth sailing, right? You ever go through storms in parenting? Most of you know, we got a house full of kids, and several times in the last few years, oldest is 25, next one's 21, and then 18, and then 12 and 10. Last few years, several times, Pam and I have looked at each other and said, this parenting thing is not for cowards. Man, it gets intense. I say all the time, and I mean it, that when my kids got driver's licenses, my prayer life went, man, I'm serious about that. I always kind of subtly thought that when you got to 18, your parenting things were on the downslide and you pray from a distance. The older your kids get, the greater the consequences to their choices. Man, has you ever been in a storm? What's your reaction in a storm? I'll tell you what a lot of us do. Middle of a storm, we sort of cuddle up and go, look, I'm gonna hunker down, I'm gonna get through this. People say to me all the time, man, when I get my act together, I'm gonna go to church. That's so wrong, folks. That's so messed up. When you're messed up, you need to come here because you're in the right place. This is not a room full of people who have their act together. It's a room full of people who are messed up. We're a bunch of beggars telling other beggars where to find bread. Folks, if you ever find a perfect church, please stay away from it. You'll mess it up. I'm serious. We are messed up people. And I love the fact that there's no perfect people in the Bible except for Jesus. I like people like Peter. People like Peter give me permission to be me, to have great faith, and then to have other times where I blow it and go, oh God, I messed up. Then to go, Lord, save me. I got kind of melancholy this morning early. I was writing some stuff about my dad. And 8 years ago, he was killed by a drunk driver in a car accident. And I was writing about my dad, just kind of a little personal exercise, and I was thinking, man, my dad was messed up. My dad had some really big flaws. The more I got to thinking about it, I thought, I think he was as messed up as I am. I mean, he had big flaws. I could tell you my dad's flaws. If you had a couple hours, I could tell you. But you know what? I don't remember my dad's flaws. That's not what I focus on. You know what I remember about my dad? I remember what he was passionate about. Can I tell you a cool part of my legacy? My dad loved Jesus. My dad loved Jesus. So let me ask you a couple things. Number one, have a courage to be a faith-filled man or woman. Guys, could I just say this to you real quick? I kind of want to focus on the guys for a second. I was with somebody who's going to die. I mean, medically speaking, this person's going to die. Just, God may do a miraculous thing, but medically speaking, this guy's going to die. And you think about it, someday you're going to die. And when you die, about 30 minutes after they have whatever they have for you, people are going to be having macaroni salad and talking about sports, okay? That's just the way it is, folks. So, what do you want them to remember you for? And guys, let me just say, do you want to remember for your muscles? Is it for your brains? Is it for what you did in your job? Is it for your finances or possessions? I can't believe that's what we want people to remember us for. We want people to remember that we love Jesus, that we had the courage to be faith-filled men, and we were flawed and messed up, and we made mistakes, but man, we clung to Him. We had the courage to be faith-filled men. Leave a legacy of faith. Second thing, take steps of faith outside your comfort zone. Learn to trust Him when the storms happen. Folks, sometimes in our lives we do stuff and it's stupid stuff and we bear the consequences of our choices. I get that. I teach that all the time. I understand that. But I also know we live in a world where sometimes stuff happens to us and we don't have any control over it. We don't have the ability to go, oh man, this is not going to happen to me. Stuff happens. The world around us changes and circumstances happen and it's not our fault, but it happens to us. So what are you going to do in the middle of that storm? You can't control the storm around you, but you can control how you respond and how you react and how you live in that storm. And I'm telling you that Peter had the right response. Lord, if it's you, tell me to get out of the boat. God's going to challenge you to get out of your comfort zone. I don't know what that's going to look like for you, but lean into that. Say, man, if it's really God who's calling me to do this, then you lean into that, and He'll take you to places that you would never go on your own strength or power. Thirdly, reach out to Him. When you get in the middle of a storm, reach out to Him. Reach out to Him. Last week I said this, so I just want to say it one more time. Ladies, if you've experienced a man in your life or a relationship with a man who has been mistreating of you, abusive, powered up on you, or in any way, shape, or form, in the name of some contorted view of maleness, some really wrong-headed view of what it meant to be a man, or, God forbid, did so in the name of Christianity, I just want to come before you as a representative of men and say, I'm so sorry. Please forgive us. That is not pleasing to Jesus. That is not how Jesus wants us to be. And I want to beg you for forgiveness on behalf of men. Because real men, godly men, Jesus-following men, have their strength never questioned, nor do they have their tenderness. And they should treat you in the God-honoring, Christ-fearing ways that you deserve. Can I say one more thing to you, ladies? I promise you, you do not want to live in a society where men are weak. If you've been hurt badly and you go, well, I wish men weren't doing that stuff, and you kind of want the pendulum to go the other ways, you don't want to live in a world where men are weak. God wants men to be strong. Never wants their tenderness to be questioned, but wants men to be strong. You want bold men. You want courageous men. And men, I want to be that alongside you. I want to be like Peter in the best of times. Sadly, many times in my life I've been like Peter in the worst of times. But I believe when Peter had a picture of Jesus that was big, that was bold, that was courageous, that he walked on water. Would you close your eyes with me? I don't know what boat you're in. I don't know what it's going to look like for you to get out of your comfort zone, but I'm telling you this. There's going to come a season in your life where Jesus is going to say to you, come. And I pray that you'll be bold and courageous. Some of you in this room, you're not in the household of faith. For you, that hearing that voice, come, is for you to even risk a relationship, to believe that Jesus could forgive you, to come to that moment in your life where you would say, yes, Jesus, if you're really who you say you are, if you really did die on that cross for me, if that was not all accident, but that was on purpose, if that's who you really are, then Jesus, I want you to come into my life. Forgive me of my sins. Make me brand new. Give me hope. Some of you in this room would say, you know what, I know Jesus, but the Jesus I know is really small, really insignificant, never pressures in on me, never asks me to get out of my comfort zone. And I just would pray right now that you could lean into him, a biblical Jesus, the Jesus of Revelation 1, the Jesus who walked on the water and looked Peter in the eyes and said, come. The Jesus who pointed to each one of his disciples and said, you Come follow me. I pray that we press into that Jesus. Amen. I hope that throughout this morning you've sensed the presence of God in this place, that you've been able to enjoy yourself. It's church. We were way crazy today. Did you know there was a time in the Old Testament where David had experienced a great victory, and he danced in the street, and he did all kind of crazy stuff, and a bunch of people looked at him and said, that does not seem right. That seemed a little excessive. Not good. And let me just say this to you. You know what? I hope you enjoyed yourself there. Hope you had fun. Hope you left church going, you know what? This is awesome. Because I really believe that Jesus wants us to celebrate his presence and his love and his grace and his kindness. I hope your Jesus is big enough to let you party and have a great time. Okay, God bless you. Stand up. Thanks for being here today. Have a great week. God bless you. Enjoy yourself this afternoon. Happy Father's Day.